let's talk energy. I know it's a real passion of yours. What is striking me is unusual right now, particularly, when we're weeks from an election, is we've got a whole lot of business leaders, braver than they have been I think in about a decade, coming out and saying that Chris Bowen, Labor's targets in relation to 2030 can't be met, won't be met, unrealistic, unsustainable, basically crackers. Are you surprised by this?
Look, I'm surprised that it's taken this long, but business in Australia's never been particularly courageous. You know that, Peter. They're usually in whatever boat they think the government is going to be on. They don't say the sorts of things that go through their minds. I know they've been thinking about this for ages. This is one area, by the way, where I think that Donald Trump has been very, very good for the world, because he's essentially called time on net zero arrangements, which nobody was going to meet. There was no way on God's green earth that any country on earth was going to meet the commitments that they've signed up to, and they're all beginning to look at each other and thinking who's going to be the first to break ranks. So I think things come slow to Australia. I think the administrative state still rules here. It's very difficult to get over the inertia of that. I think that the inner city populations are convinced that the world is about to end and that windmills and solar panels will save them. So I think there are an enormous amount of things to overcome. But I do think, Peter, don't you feel it? The ground is shifting under your feet on a day-to-day basis around here, around Australia and around the world. Banks now, the world's big banks have pulled out of the net zero agreement.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. And of course, the issue for all the investors out there, those who were the first mover advantage on renewables, who worked out how to cream the subsidies and make their profits, they are all a bit at sea with Peter Dutton's plans to put in nuclear power, because it blows apart their business model. And of course, nuclear power under his plan would remain in public ownership. Again, they can't get their hands on any money out of it as well. So I think that's part of the drive behind some of the hysteria we've seen. Let's go to this whole debate that's run out the first 2 days in Parliament. Again, a feature of Question Time today. Who knew what when? Why the Prime Minister took about 10 days to be told, so he says, and so we can read through the tea leaves, about this potential for a mass casualty terror attack in Sydney. We know the Premier was briefed, and then we've got some sort of significant delay. It was a big question today in Question Time, focus in Question Time. Have a listen.
When was the Prime Minister first informed of the planned mass casualty terror attack against Sydney's Jewish community?
I'm happy to provide a brief through the security agencies if requested by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. The priority here is not the playing of political games.
The Prime Minister is studiously avoiding answering the question. If he doesn't want to be relevant to the question, he can sit down.
I don't think the opposition is playing politics here. They're not asking to know what's in the briefing. They just want to know when he had it. And I think the more that there's subterfuge in response to what's a pretty simple question from the Prime Minister, I mean, he either is following the proper protocols, our security apparatus is following the proper protocols, or they're not. What's going on here?
Yeah, well, I think the problem that he's got is one of comparison, right? And that's happening quite a lot with New South Wales, where Chris Minns seems to be much more on top of his game than the Prime Minister is. Now, when the story was broken, Chris Minns said, fair cop, we were trying to keep it secret, basically, but I got told the day after it was discovered by the police. I think the obvious and embarrassing answer for the Prime Minister is they didn't know about it until he read about it in the newspaper. That's not necessarily so much an issue for the Prime Minister as it might be for some of the security agencies, because I would assume that if you come across something like that, when did the New South Wales Police tell the Australian Federal Police, and when were all of our security agencies alerted to this? And of course, the buck stops with the Prime Minister, and he should be informed. So it's an issue for him. It's, I think, also an issue internally for the security agencies. No one likes to be asked these sorts of questions. It's perfectly reasonable to ask the question, though. We do need to know how well informed our Prime Minister and our security agencies are about what was potentially a significant mass casualty event.
Chris, when we had all these issues on in the Abbott office about Islamic State and more, there was a senior advisor in our office who had daily briefings. Now, some of those he would run up the tree to the Prime Minister, come and knock on the door and say, I need urgent time in the diary. Sometimes just walk in and say, I need the boss, I need to go through this right now, and it'd happen immediately. Other times he'd say, we need to call an NSC. We need to have that conversation around the table. But there was never a moment that I, as Chief of Staff, didn't think that information wasn't coming up into the office where someone would be making a judgment call. To be fair, there wasn't a day that the Prime Minister didn't walk past this bloke's office as well and say, hey, anything I need to know. So what worries me here is you might have a blockage at the end with the intelligence agencies, but I reckon you've got a blockage in the Prime Minister's office or in the Prime Minister's brain where he's not actively in the middle of this crisis saying, hey, are we doing enough? Can I give you more resources? What do you need? Tell me what's going on.
I think you've also put your finger on something which people in the Labor Party are asking themselves. It's about the effectiveness of the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister's capacity with briefs as well. So those two questions get asked, I hear them asked routinely from people about, the nature of the Prime Minister's office, the competence of the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister's capacity to get around a brief when he is told about things. I think that it's a reasonable thing that people do get some sense of who knew what when with this. It may not be that Anthony Albanese is the most culpable person in this. I've got enormous respect for our security agencies. I think they're very, very good. I think they're run by very competent people. But you know what? I think that we need to know a little bit more about their operations on some occasions, and I think this is a fair question.
Spot on.
Answer it.
Mate, the gallery used to call me a hard ass, Chris, but there was nothing that happened in the office that I
They called you way worse things than that, Peter.
Yeah, I know, but you could never accuse me.
No one accused you of being
me of not being.
Yeah.
And no one accused me of not being across the brief, and I think that's probably the accusation. In the nicest possible terms, I'd levy at the PMO and the guy in the top chair. Hey, Deep Seek, a lot of concern, but all the government's done today in terms of the public service, it said, we're just going to take it off your phones. Now, if we're worried about the public servants and this Chinese AI app, aren't we worried about our entire economy? Aren't we worried about commercial players? Aren't we worried about people at home?
Yeah, look, and I think that this entire area it's an absolute Pandora's box. And if I'd told you last year at the beginning of last year, that artificial intelligence would explode out of the blocks essentially, and you would be able to do things that you had never imagined. And like I've been using ChatGPT a lot just to see what it can do. And what it can do is quite remarkable. It also, by the way, will drive enormous demand for power. The extraordinary thing is that, once again, we were told that China is way behind, they will not catch up, and then all of a sudden this thing comes out. It looks like it's a pretty good model, and by the way, they've done it much more cheaply and using much less power. So, of course, we should be deeply suspicious about the way that this will be used. But this is the great arms race now, Peter. It is a fascinating thing, and of course, people should be very wary about all of their devices and particularly the kind of information that they put up online and the kind of things that they use, the kind of tools that they use online, because, essentially we're the product in the end of all this. What all the governments and particularly all the private sector and the Chinese Communist Party want is our data, and they're fishing it out of us all the time. We seem pretty happy to hand a lot of it over.
Great to have you back, Chris. It's going to be a fast and furious election year.
It will not be dull, Peter Credlin.
Won't be dull.